language that's used, definitions, and we talked about 10 codes and various other things like that. What do we mean by safe? This is a strange use of the word safe I'm not previously familiar with as the bombs go off. But also the culture, the emergency management culture. And certainly we see when we try to fuse in our state equivalent of ReachBack, where we link the university systems to our emergency managers, the difference in culture between a paramilitary emergency management, we've got to make a decision now, with what may be the science culture of preponderance of evidence, and we're going to be precise, and we're going to be incredibly precise at what we're saying, because that's what we need to communicate. This information acquisition and transfer, as the other speakers have alluded to this morning, we're basically dealing with an information overflow. How do you get it to the right spot in real time? And what we need to develop is asynchronous communication, as you'll see with some of the examples that we use. This often is geographically dispersed in both time as well as spatial disbursement. Delving a little deeper now and moving into the challenges from the health perspective and focusing now on bioevents, since this is the theme of the conference, I want to focus on 3 areas that I think are particularly difficult for emergency managers in partnership with their public health experts to deal with. The first is getting your hands on the information. There's a tremendous amount of information that usually has to be coordinated with very disparate information systems. Very often with an outbreak of an exotic disease, and we can take a look at SARS or avian influenza, you can basically break that down into in very simplistic terms, two topics. Where is it, and where is it not? That becomes very important whether you're using geospatial mapping technology or surveillance systems, whether you want to use BioWarn or any of the other various systems to, one, signal that an event has occurred, and then to map the scope and the nature. And this is not just for the CNN news consumption to give information to the public, but it also is threat signatures. Will depend on whether is this a multicentric outbreak, is this a unicentric outbreak. That gives you information both from the intelligence side of the house as well as basic epidemiology for what kinds of things are you dealing with. Oftentimes there's biosecurity concerns, and I use biosecurity here not in the sense of classified information or anything, but biosecurity in the sense that a lot of times the cows and the people you're dealing with are contagious. So to get this information in a secure manner with minimal exposure to people, it didn't get a lot of airplay, but during the anthrax outbreaks of 2001, California actually experienced a natural animal outbreak of anthrax in a very remote area in the Central Valley of California, actually adjacent to a major urbanized area, but the site was relatively remote. And early on in getting this information, you can imagine the heightened level of concern that suddenly we found out we had 26 dead cows in a field from anthrax in the height of all these letters flying around. What do you do with the carcasses? How do you get the information back to your veterinary diagnostic experts? Assuming you can get your hands on the information, then this has to be analyzed, digested, regurgitated, processed, spindled, and mutilated by your various subject matter experts, which oftentimes cross disciplines that are in different locations. So that leads to what I refer to as death by conference call. At one point during the anthrax outbreaks, I was on conference calls for, a good 6 hours of the day. Am I still there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay, I was just making sure I had the Deftone sound on this end. We had these conference calls with hundreds of people on them, which, as anybody who does data analysis knows, is probably not the best way to do things, particularly if you're trying to achieve consensus, but also it's not an efficient utilization of time. So asynchronous abilities to get information and to process it, similar to what we saw with the laboratory network with the SARS outbreak. It shows the level and the speed with which these communication networks have progressed. Then once you get your hands on the information, you got to disseminate it. And you've got multiple audiences now that you have to deal with. You have to deal with recommended procedures, mitigation procedures, treatment recommendations, dealing with a multidisciplinary healthcare audience, but also protection that the public can take. You have multiple sources putting information out. We've learned that we have joint information centers. Not only do you have to bring the incident commanders together in unified command, you got to bring all the information people together in one spot so you get a unified message. There's nothing worse to blow your credibility in an emergency situation when multiple sources are saying maybe the same thing in their minds, but saying it in a different way. And that's not for homogenization or control of the message. It's just consistency. You need consistency during the situation. And then, as was alluded to previously, you're competing for media bandwidth. And, I don't refer to media as the evil empire. They have a job to do just like everybody else, and we can find the win-win situations. But they thrive. Their need is to bring out controversy, to bring out spectacularism, which may not be the message that you need to get out, for instance, with all you need to do is wash your hands, and this is not going to be a problem. That's not the message they want to get out. So we've turned to using our public television systems to get information to the public that have a mission to perform that and are different than the CNNs and the cable news networks and the various other people that have the media bandwidth. And this refers to the Anthrax channel, all Anthrax all the time, as you can see in the little cartoon. Communication becomes key. Communicating to the various constituent groups with a unified message and to convey, telling the truth. It's okay to say, we don't know. We're going to figure it out, and we're going to be working with this together. And as we point out, these concepts of relative risk. I joke a little bit with my educational partners that one of the things the general public is congenitally unable to do is perform a relative risk assessment. And maybe that should be mandatory education in our elementary schools rather than some of the other things that are taught. Again, because of this, for those of you that aren't familiar with California, we have several disaster management principles that any of our management systems operate under. And the first and foremost, as was alluded to earlier by Dr. Boyd, was that all disasters are local. Fundamentally, the disaster is affecting a local community. The locals will know their situation best and are in charge. The role of the state is to support the local management, to provide resources from uninvolved areas of the state to get and obtain those very specialized things that Palos Verdes or Paso Robles may not have, being a relatively rural part of the state of California. And this is a way we unload the burden from the incident commander to figure out where they are going to get a widget. They just have to say, we need a widget to do this. And then there are other people who will figure out where the widget will come from. The other overriding principle is that the requests exceeding capabilities of a local area are mutual aid. We have a master mutual aid agreement that dates from the mid-1950s in California that all 58 counties and every one of our 300 and some odd cities are signatory to. And that's another whole discussion of how that was obtained. But everybody is signed on to the mutual aid agreement. And in its simplest form, it says, I'll lend you a fire truck today for a police cruiser tomorrow. It's more complex than that, but we do have the capability of moving prodigious amounts of resources from one end of the state to the other. And anybody who saw the firestorms of Southern California in late last year, saw basically every one of our state fire engines, plus some from several other states, moved from one end of the state to the other to provide mutual aid assistance. The other thing that was alluded to is that we use a standardized emergency management system. Every state governmental organization has to use this system. Our non-governmental partners are encouraged to use it. They don't have to use it if they don't want to. They won't get paid then, which is a very potent user. So we have dealt with an ICS, and we have, and SEMS is what our instant command system is, what we call it. But that allows us to speak in an interoperable language that transcends.
Dr. Trott, we lost you.
Try different signals.
I don't know, he was coming in loud and clear, but there were these little whistles.
This is a visual. Wait for him or something.
Hello?
Capability for use during the firestorms, which we've hit upwards of 70% utilization. The University of California, through our telehealth and medicine sites, we have a linked telehealth network of 65 sites throughout California, encompassing both educational sites, public health facilities, correctional health facilities, community-based health facilities, and through our linkages and partnerships, actually link into most of the western United States in the health network. This is simply a diagram showing you the breadth and depth of California. Those blue dots that show up relatively faintly on your screen are where we have fixed sites. But as you can see, there are other areas of the state where either fixed sites don't exist or they are serviced by other telemedicine networks that we can get into. Through a grant from the California Telemedicine and eHealth Center, UC Davis pursued a $209,000 grant. Most of that went for equipment. I think about $200,000 of it went for equipment and widgets. And that purchased a SecureLink satellite terminal, which are similar to what the embedded reporters in Iraq use from NORSAT satellite technology. And then we linked through our ISDN lines the State Operations Center into the Western Telemedicine Network. So this is now a linked project. This is simply a cartoon that basically shows this uses IP-based technology, and I will admit right now I am not a technical satellite type person, so George, bear with me here if I get something some message here messed up, Peter, on exactly how these things fit together. I can hook anybody who's interested up to our technology people that can do this, but it's voice data and audio, as well as fiber optic instruments such as various cameras to look at skin lesions. It has a satellite latency of about a half second, so we're not too terribly keen on sticking endoscopes down either cows or people, but because of that little delay. But short of that, you can use it for just about anything. We bounce it off the satellite, drops to a hub that's actually located at our telemedicine site. We'll have a redundancy to the state operating center soon, and then it goes over the internet system, and you can hook people together. The system itself is quite portable. It moves around in suitcases. UC Davis is allowed use of 2 megabytes of bandwidth on the Galaxy 10R satellite, and we use that on a daily basis for both rural and actually frontier. It's not well known, but California does have some frontier parts of the state. Telehealth consultations and continuing medical education, particularly into sites that do not have the last mile, do not have ISDN or broadband connection. We actually use a wireless connection from the satellite receiver into the actual building or whatever, so it doesn't require running of any lines at all. And then OES, for their part, they have access to the single portable terminal, soon hopefully to be a few more, on demand for emergency use. And this complements our existing trailer system, which requires a trailer basically to be towed into an area. We do have to have access into it. This is really a suitcase that can be flown and dropped just about anywhere, although dropped carefully for use in a very remote part of the state. This is some pictures of the various setup. You can see we've used it both for telehealth consultations as well as terrorist type scenarios. It's very high quality, high speed. We actually were going to set this satellite up for this conference. However, it's getting used for a presentation tomorrow. It's portable. It comes in 3 suitcases. I'm told that by my technical staff that even I can set it up in 15 minutes, which says a lot. We believe this is the first non-military, non-media application of this kind of thing in the United States. At least that's what we're told. And because we're using wireless, we're experimenting with various wireless technology. We don't need any kind of landline support. That also links our emergency operating center. This is the California State Operations Center into that network in a two-dimensional or bidirectional location. You can see off to the side various conference rooms that we can use for various press conferences. We can get a message out as well as getting information in to the operations center. We've used both the satellite and the satellite project for several different things. Shortly after the anthrax envelopes, even though California was not involved, we knowingly received none of the envelopes. We were able to broadcast just-in-time information to 35 different health sites. And I'm a big believer that this is probably, some form like this will be the way the majority of information will be conveyed to healthcare providers. It's unrealistic to expect the vast majority of healthcare providers to be an expert in West Nile virus, SARS, anthrax plague, Ebola virus, viral hemorrhagic fevers, plus do all the other things they need to do on a daily basis. They become incredibly interested when now you have patients and you have a situation. They are very receptive in using this technology. We can very quickly get out to their sites the information they need in the time they need to do it. We've used the project in six consultations over the last 2 months. It's actually quite spectacular. You go out there, the whole city gets out there to see the satellite setup because they think this is incredibly high tech. We've used it on 2 terrorism-related exercises, one in the Bay Area. It works very nicely for basic secure level communications. And then the animal health exercise we have on tap, we're going to do an avian influenza outbreak simulation next week with the object. Where we're going with this, we hope to purchase 6 more units, which would give us both some redundant capability as well as geographic dispersal of these units into various parts of the state. We're actively exploring right now linkage into the public television system. And again, using that as I referenced to move information to people, kind of the video equivalent of the emergency action emergency broadcast system, so they can get information and CNN and the public TV or the commercial TVs can still pursue the things they need to do. And it is important. I mean, if you noticed in the State Operations Center, we have 8 TV monitors for a reason. We get information significantly important to management from modern commercial TV. The other advantage that this would do is linking into our public system. That basically puts us into the broadcast networks. We can inject a signal into satellite TV, direct TV, Dish Network, those various things, as well as getting into the broadcast networks if we need to. We link right now into the University of California TV network, which is a public access TV band that is carried on some satellite services. And then we're pursuing linkage into all 61 local public health agencies to actually bring them up with a video equivalent of the public health network for California. So with that, this works because of the dedication of lots of different people. Cal Chang and Jacqueline Ransom, who run the operation for the University of California under the direction of Tom Nesbitt, Jim Watkins and Tom Wardell from the Office of Emergency Services, the Office of the President, who supports the use of telemedicine technology, the vendor of the satellite system that has put all the parts together so it works. And with that, I'd be happy to stop and take any questions that anybody has.
Well, thank you, Dr. Trott. That was very informative, and it's always good to see more satellite gear in the field. I should say right up front that for the past 18 months I have urged the Department of Homeland Security and the HHS decision makers to actually install DBS equipment in every single public health facility, every clinic, every hospital, so that they could use existing backhaul to go to either the EchoStar uplink or the DirecTV uplink and put a broadcast signal, a video signal, into every healthcare facility in real time. Maybe a little too exotic for them, but you in California already are practically there, so I think you can understand, the direction I want everybody to go in. But it's off-the-shelf technology, and I think it would be a very easy way to get not only redundancy, but pure video flowing out to the entire country using existing technology. Dr. Trott, let's start I'd like to ask you, in the context of all the preparations underway in California, how well prepared do you think you are at this point in the event that some bioterrorist incident took place?
Well, I think as several other speakers mentioned earlier, preparedness for an event is a journey. It's not a destination. We in emergency management in California, we learn from our experiences. The state fire and rescue system, didn't evolve with a bunch of people sitting around a table thinking good thoughts. It evolved with a whole lot of people fighting fire on the fire lines over 75 years. And really, we judge things with what I refer to as epiphanies. And our fire and rescue system had their epiphany in 1963 in the Bel Air fires. Our law enforcement network had their epiphany with the Watts riots in the mid 1960s. Our health network had their epiphany in 2001 with the anthrax outbreaks. So we're better than we were yesterday. We will be better tomorrow. It's not a matter of you are prepared. You have to be prepared. If one of these events occurs today, we will respond to it. And that comes with something that we really believe strongly, that terrorism and technological disasters are simply one more form of the multi-hazard nature of disasters. And if you have an all-hazard plan, the people and the widgets may be specific for the event, but the management structure, the way you're going to control information, move information, analyze, obtain resources, protect the public, send the message, is really the same. And it's a matter of getting a group of people that have not had to do this before to up to speed and to the table, and finding out that the biggest thing that I continue to be amazed at dealing with some of my colleagues in public health is this overwhelming feeling that they've got to reinvent the wheel by themselves, and suddenly they've got this insurmountable problem. And you can just see a relief come across their faces when they know all this other stuff exists. It just has never been used in this way before, and that you aren't here alone, and that here you concentrate on your subject areas of expertise, and the system will support you in doing it. And we found that out with the Newcastle disease. Our Department of Food and Agriculture, State Department of Food and Agriculture, were paired up with our forestry department, who knew nothing about avian influenza, but knew exactly how to run a major incident. And that pairing paid off in spades.
Do you think California, obviously with OASIS and some of the other components of its overall disaster communications infrastructure, California is light years ahead of some states. And the question I have is, with respect to satellite technology, do you think that it would be beneficial if there was a resource at the Department of Homeland Security, possibly under FEMA, for example, that would be solely devoted to satellite and helping states in either acquiring the technology or getting the training necessary to better use the technology, as well as to push the evolution of the technology for the sorts of applications that you've described this afternoon?
Well, I'd just like to comment on your first point that we view our resources in California as not solely for California. Our satellite technology, no more than our search and rescue team, stop at the border. I mean, we're involved in operations with our sister states adjacent to us, Nevada, Arizona, and actually with Canada and Mexico, as well as partners in the entire Pacific Rim, in exporting technology, sharing resources, learning from each other in terms of best practices. I don't think satellite technology is necessarily the answer for every state. It's incredibly expensive. It needs to be adjusted to the specific threat. Where I think the federal government, has opportunities for leadership and is in a coordinating role. Interoperability standards, as we've talked about, and procuring, perhaps bandwidth for states that choose, or assisting the states in obtaining bandwidth that is used in a reasonable distribution. We still, in California, if you will, waste. I hate to use that term, but we underutilize our bandwidth simply because we need a surge capacity. That's a valuable resource that could be shared among several states, for instance, to ensure that every state had access when they needed it, but the bandwidth itself didn't go to waste.
From this morning's presentations, were there any things that were said, any discussions that you'd like to comment on? You've been up so early, you've been so diligent in sticking with this entire session that I want to avail myself of your expertise, if you will.
Well, I mean, it was good to hear from Craig again and Peter. I've worked with both those gentlemen. I think we're pretty much saying the same thing. The thing I have been impressed with is the consistency of message. That actually, although we're talking specifically of interoperability, we're kind of echoing or reflecting the greater discussion of Homeland Security that's occurring. We are slowly moving beyond the widget, what I refer to as the widget phase, where we had this PPE fest where everybody now has their gas masks and plastic boots, and moving on to now, wait a minute, how do we actually utilize all this stuff we have? And that comes back to the training of the people, figuring out how the various disciplines integrate into the system, and for lack of a better word, embracing diversity, recognizing that we define first responders as a whole bunch of different people that are required at the table for various emergencies. I mean, our vector control districts have never thought of themselves as a first responder, but with West Nile virus, they're suddenly in the middle of learning what an instant command system is and who they share resources with. So, I've been somewhat heartened to hear that I think, people are on the right track. We're pretty much saying the same thing, but it's not a one size fits all. We certainly have seen that. The support system has to come from the bottom up. It cannot be imposed from the top down. The United States is too diverse of an area to make a one size fits all work.
And are you concerned about the overtraining dimension, something that was mentioned this morning, the fact that, we've gotten this situation where we're training people and perhaps going too far, or do you think that we struck a balance? What are your thoughts on that?
No, I think we haven't figured out how to train yet. We're going through what I think is a required evolutionary phase. With my local hat on as a medical director of fire departments, I can tell you that our required training now exceeds the amount of training hours that are available. So you have to become selective. I'm concerned. I still don't think we're training the right way. And I'm involved in curricular development, and we were tasked with developing a 1-hour talk for biodiseases for the healthcare environment. And I was somewhat, politically incorrect, because I said, we don't need to talk about West Nile. We don't need to talk about anthrax and Ebola. These people are not going to this is not the group that's going to recognize it first. They need to know instant command system. They need to know where they fit in to the system, how to protect themselves, how to get the message out, the 5 things to do right, and the 5 things not to do that are going to screw the event up. That's the kind of training we need to have, and that as that becomes integrated into our training cycles, I think our need for specialized training will be confined more to those specialized groups that truly need it. We can't teach everybody everything they need to know. One, they're going to forget it when they need to use it, and it's not an effective utilization of anybody's time or effort. The use of internet technologies, things like this, where people, although I'm kind of disappointed I didn't get to come to Maine and get a lobster for a trip, are much more effective utilization of much more effective utilization of people's time and effort, because we do have information numbing, information overload, and basically people turn off the message. They need to get the information when they need it, and that's still a challenge. We haven't figured out how to do that yet.
Well, Dr. Tarot, we appreciate your being here. Come and get your lobster sometime. We'll be happy to get you one when you arrive.
And that goes for the other speakers too.
So thank you, sir, for participating, and we're going to take a short break here before we get into our next session with Citizen Corps, Olin Johnston. Thank you, California. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Peter.
So now we're going to break until 2:30.
Yes, we're going to break until 2:30, and then we'll get into our final loop. That is, we'll have Olin Johnston, coordinator